Hi, my name is Sabu Francis. I'm an architect from India. Thank you for tuning into this video. I'm creating this series called Any Architect, and this is one of the videos in that series. I hope you can listen to these talks in sequence because sometimes I build on something which I have spoken earlier. This video and many videos which I make are largely unscripted. I know what I want to talk about, but I have not really written it down. So this results in some stutter and and I hope you can live through that and listen to this and give me useful feedback, which may be useful for others who are listening to this and watching this. So thank you for tuning in here. And in this particular session, I want to start with a kind of a story, which I'm sure all of us have experienced at some point in time. So you are feeling not too well and you feel that you need to consult a doctor. So you go to a doctor's office, clinic, and you're sitting in front of the doctor and the doctor listens to you and hears you out and you say, I'm not feeling too well and I think I have a headache and whatnot, and you're just bringing out your anxiety in front of the doctor. Now the doctor is, let's say that the doctor is an experienced old doctor, and that doctor has an expressionless face. Have you noticed? Doctors don't really show they don't say, oh my God, you have this or something like that. They don't widen their eyes, and so they calmly listen to you, and they are trained to do that. They are trained to keep their emotions on the side. And what they are doing actually is they are doing two things. They are listening to the symptoms which you are narrating. The things which you tell to the doctor are the symptoms, but they are also watching out for signs. Signs are things which they can detect themselves. Okay, what's the BP of this person? What is the temperature? And what are the gestures he's making? What is the volume of conversation which this person has? Because that's also a pretty good indicator of what is happening to that particular person. So all that is going on behind that blank expression. And what they do internally is pretty interesting. It's actually called differential diagnosis. And when I learned about that, I realized that this is something which we architects should learn certain lessons. And in this series, so I think I forgot to tell that. In this series, when I say that I'm going to explain about architecture, it actually is focused towards young and fresh architects who have just come out of college, students also. And it covers architecture at a very wide level, not just necessarily in the building industry, because architecture is essentially trying to make some context really nicely, handle some context nicely. So you can have software architecture also, and I do both. I do regular architecture of the physical environment, and I also develop software. So there also the word architecture is used because there also at the deepest level they are trying to change the context and support the context which one needs when we are using software or the internet and all that. So coming back to this doctor, and the doctor is assessing that, and that doctor is using this differential diagnosis system method. What they're doing is in front of them they kind of put up options. This doctor is putting up options. You don't realize it, but they say, okay, could it be this? Could it be that? Could it be that? So you can think of vertical columns of diagnosis of various diseases or conditions which you may have. And as you are speaking to the doctor is actually started differentiating and eliminating things which are obviously not what you are suffering from. One of the advice which the doctor will always consider, and which is basically the point of this particular talk, is what I call as the null advice, where the doctor says there's nothing wrong with this person. And you may have experienced this, a lot of us have experienced this. You go to this doctor and you're expressing your anxiety and all the problems which you are facing and you are feeling slightly ill and whatnot. And at the end of it, the doctor says, there's nothing wrong with you. You can go and sleep. Don't worry. And if things get bad, then you come back. Okay, so this kind of situation where the doctor has not recommended anything at all to that patient, that situation I call it as the null advice. And that null advice you can see being given in many professions. You can see it being given by lawyers, for example. You go to a good lawyer and you have some angst against your neighbor or whatever, and you want to file a case or something like that, and the lawyer listens to you and says that don't do anything, it just unnecessarily complicates things. Or you go to a financial advisor and you say, I want to do this with my money, I want to do that, and the guy says, no, don't do anything. So this kind of situation has to be understood from the point of view of architects. Unfortunately, in our college, in our education system, we have been trained to produce things. So a lot of our subjects also are to do with actual production of architecture. It's not based on giving thoughtful advice to the world and say that, okay, let me consider what all things can be done for your requirement. And one of the things which I need to consider is the null advice, where you don't do anything. You don't do anything at all to elevate the situation, because for all you know, the side effects may be more harmful than whatever cure you are trying to give. But this very rarely happens in the field of architecture. In fact, I would say I am one of the few madmen who actually could convince a client. It has happened to me 2-3 times, and I can tell about that later, where I convinced that particular client that don't do it, don't make anything, it's not needed. Of course, I did get my money for whatever effort I did, and that is another part of this whole story, because a lot of times this null advice is not given is because society doesn't respect an architect's intelligence, and especially when it results in nothing to be done, that person does not go out of the office saying that, okay, let me give you your fees for whatever effort you took on this. In fact, our architectural practice is tied to whether that construction really happens or can be happening. And that is very tragic, because society does not know that an architect is giving actual thoughtful advice, and it's that advice which needs to be paid, not the fact that you are paying for that construction. But that never gets registered. In fact, these kind of topics are not even taught. We are not taught economics. We are not taught how to properly market yourself as a profession. In fact, we are not even taught what's the difference between a profession and a business. So a lot of understanding of the world and understanding of the environment and understanding of what one architect does is all kind of learned on the fly with some heuristics and some discussions in parties and all, is how people pick up the tips and tricks on how to handle money, for example. And in that process, this part that architects should be considered as people who give thoughtful advice, that is not really getting registered, unfortunately. And society also doesn't know about this. So if you were to sit with a client and spend a lot of time understanding that problem, and then you tell the client you don't need to really design anything, and it will be wrong to build something just because you think it needs to be built. They don't pay you, and that does pinch a lot of architects. So there is a natural tendency to convert every requirement into something which needs to be built. So let me now explore this further with some examples. I am right now, I am in my hometown in Kerala, my old house. I am sitting in my old house, and I am And I'm contemplating about all this, and I'm trying to figure out what is the best way to help young architects and fresh architects on setting all these things right. So in this series, I usually open up topics which are a lot more expansive. It covers a lot more points. And I'm trying to guide youngsters and fresh architects. In fact, anybody who's really wanting to take a deep look at what this subject is. And one of the things which I do here is that I've got this small little electric cycle, and I go around cycling around this countryside. And I've been noticing a lot of private bungalows in various plots, and I'm cycling there and I don't see anybody staying there. There are a lot of these bungalows around where I stay, and some of them are quite pretty. But then I asked somebody, how come nobody's staying there in these buildings? And slowly I started realizing what's happening in this state of Kerala. It's at the southern tip of India. So some people call Kerala as kind of a European country because there's a fair amount of wealth here, and the wealth is because of the diaspora spread all over the world. And they bring in money, and that has resulted in a kind of a pretty wealthy kind of environment here. And the reason why these bungalows are coming up with nobody staying there, in a few cases there are some old parents and grandparents staying in these bungalows, and they are really staying only on the ground floor because they can't climb up. So it's a very peculiar kind of situation here, and many of them are just locked up with nobody staying there. And the reason, if you start peeling the layers of the onion, and then you start looking inside, and then you realize that it is a play of a lot of different factors. Somebody had this ancestral property and they want to make a statement that I have made my own house there. Some people are under the illusion that they will come back in their old age, which they don't. Okay, many of them are now settling abroad. And or some people say that once in a while we will come back here and all that. This particular house was also created like that. I actually used to stay in Bombay, and this was a very occasionally used house of ours, and it's in a pretty bad shape. I'm slowly rectifying it. So these kind of things, what happens is that the real reason why that particular built and form has to come there really does not have much of validity. A lot of times it is to do with a personal ego kind of thing, that okay, I want to make a statement to my old neighbors that I have made it in life. It's like buying a expensive car and proudly showing it in your open garage for your neighbors to see, something of that sort. And the tragedy is that this is resulting in a lot of ripple effects which is going around, and this is not really realized. To be fair, a lot of regularly trained architects don't do this. I mean, if they are not in this particular thing, there is a vacuum because of that. The kind of people who are actually doing these projects are many times are not architects. They are untrained civil engineers and even draftsmen. Somebody who has some hold over the local panchayat or municipality. They are the ones who are actually designing it. They know how to do push-pull on SketchUp and all that and create something nice. But they don't know anything else. And this results in these kind of projects. These projects are untested. Nobody has stayed there, so you don't know whether it has become hot or cold, or is this ventilation sufficient, or if you have a party or something, what would be the acoustics, what would be the environment there. Nothing. It is just one piece of concrete and brick which is just there. That's it. And this is just an example of what happens when society does not really realize the importance of an architect saying, no, don't do anything, and still pay that architect for that. That didn't happen. So because of that, fresh architects who don't have any other option, they have to finally convince that themselves and their clients that yes, we have to make this bungalow. That's it, because our fees are tied to the fact that something has to be constructed there, right? So this is a point which I wanted to bring out to not only the architects but even non-architects who are hopefully listening to this, that please try to understand an architect is a trained professional, and we spend a lot of time understanding all the nuances. All other fields, engineering fields, have shifted from 5 years. When I joined IIT, the engineering fields were all 5 years, then they shifted that to 4 years, but architecture is still 5 years. In fact, architecture, according to me, is a subject where the learning can never stop. And the reason is very simple. Architecture is got a very peculiar, it's a peculiar kind of specialization. It's a specialization where an architect is trained to be a generalist. I mean, it sounds contradictory. Why a generalist? Because an architect is doing something which is weaving together multiple threads of thought into a context and making sure that that context is well supported. Right? That's what an architect does. An architect is somebody who is handling the synthesis machine. What is architecture finally? Architecture is a context in which multiple things hit you at the same time, that user, at the same time, the heat, the ventilation, the breeze, the acoustic, the cultural context, the symbols around you. I mean, there are a million things which comes and shapes the quality of life for that particular person from moment to moment, and not just one person, for every person. So it's a mammoth task. It's a huge task to understand each and every thread, stitch it up together, and then say this is what needs to be done for that particular continuously changing context, so that that life gets properly supported. This is something which educational institutes and teachers and all don't really teach. Architects has to do a very, very difficult and a very noble exercise when you design. And so we have to really consider multiple things, many different things, and then put together a solution which itself has to change. This chair has to change. Sometimes you cannot physically go and change the walls, and yet the context is changing, and still that particular fixed walls handles that varying changes in the context. So it's a huge task. It's a huge task, and therefore an architect's learning can never stop. Now, if you look at this at a much more wider way, I said that in my earlier talks, I said that I'm talking about architecture at a very wide level. Even in computer science and in internet technologies and the environment over there too, there is this kind of stuff which is happening. And there's a whole lot of damage which is happening there. There are a whole lot of different issues which happens because people just thoughtlessly create a software. And people are double tapping on Instagram and clicking on Twitter and getting agitated by that, and a whole lot of stuff is happening there, and very similar kind of situation where people are not really applying thought and say, okay, this particular way of handling software need not be done. We don't have to do this. And create more side effects, which creates more problems. So there too, in many cases, you need to give the null advice, and a software architect has to say that, okay, I've studied your problem and I don't think we have to really make any software for this. This again does not happen much. And again it is tied to the way money is made in the software industry. So plenty of stuff which is happening in the software industry are useless, creating a lot of unnecessary side effects, driving up our dopamine and our sense of very, very primal curiosities about various things, spread gossip and lies and misinformation. It's all started, become so virulent. It is pretty equivalent to having a wonderful green space in Kerala. Kerala, we call it God's own country. It is so fertile. If you put your finger in the ground, you probably may see a creeper climbing up. It's so fertile. And such lovely greenery and environment here. And then you go and plonk a building there, which nobody uses. So this is, how long can this go on? People don't realize that there are very finer ramifications of your design thinking and your design process. And if it carelessly results in a building, and then you don't know what else would have got constructed here and what all things would have happened. Like, I dread all these buildings which I'm seeing, these bungalows which I'm seeing as I cycle around. I dread what will happen here after 15, 20 years. Firstly, there are going to be social problems. There already are some social problems in this particular state. But it's going to get much, much more aggravated. These buildings are not tested. Nobody's staying there. So I wouldn't be surprised if nature takes over that whole place and it'll all start getting, really terrible to maintain and may end up creating safety hazards. I hope it doesn't happen, and I hope I'm wrong in some way. But how long can people keep maintaining and repainting a bungalow which they built because they wanted to prove something to their neighbors? So this has got another problem. A lot of misunderstanding of society with architects exists because architects tend to think that my originality also has to be expressed along with whatever that particular ego problem which some architects do that. And this is not corrected by our institutions or our fellow architects to society. There are no real sessions where the regular people in the society are taught what on earth does an architect contribute. I've almost never heard of any session where a group of architects get together and invite the lay public and say, okay, let me explain to you what architecture really is. I hope this particular talk, a lot of non-architects will listen to this. So they are under the illusion that architects will express their ego into that particular project of mine. And it frightens a lot of people. They think that if I give this work to a regular architect, he may make it a lot more expensive. I don't want to put something there, okay, because I want to prove something to the neighbors. But now when I bring in an architect, he also wants to put his originality and his expressiveness or whatnot, and which is largely wrong. Okay, a lot of architects don't do this, but society doesn't know because a few architects who did this, and society says, oh my God, look at that, it is probably so expensive, so I better not go to an architect. And that is that little hole through which a lot of non-architects slip in and say, they are standing pretty egoless. They say, you want to make a building, I'll do it. You tell me what you want. I will play around with SketchUp to suit your requirements. And they believe they are doing a professional job. And the clients who are giving it this to this non-architects, they think they are getting a professional service, unlike the architect who is putting his own wild ideas according to them. Very tragic actually. Because of that, a lot of these projects which are there, it will just crumble and die away 15 years, 20 years, or it will be just invaded by creepers and whatnot. And more insidiously, these things are actually creating a lot of other ripple effects to the environment, this kind of projects. So let me give you another story. When I was young and we used to travel down from, this was before Konkan Railway came up and reduced the travel time. But railway was not so easy. I mean, rail travel was not so easy those days. So we had to almost spend 3 days to come from Bombay all the way to this southern tip of India. And it was a lovely journey. It was very exciting, thinking that I'll be meeting my cousins and my grandparents and my aunts and uncles and all that here. So what used to happen is that the train is going pretty smoothly, and you hear the clickety clack of the railway lines as the wheels go on the railway lines, and you see kadak 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 kadak. It is just going in a pretty uniform rhythm. But every once in a while that rhythm gets spoiled. You see kadak 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 kadak, and then as a child I started realizing that there is a pattern here, because anytime the sound changes, there is a station after that. So I kind of realized, and that happens, right, because these railway lines are crossing over, and the pattern of the sound changes, and when the pattern of the sound becomes really large, then I know it's a big station, and there's a good chance that the train is going to halt there, and I may get some food over there. So I'm a small kid, and my parents and my siblings, they still tease me about it, because they say sapad in the station only, the station for getting food has come. And this, why am I mentioning, is that there are various patterns which emerge from whatever activities humans do. Now there is another pattern which I don't know whether you have noticed. I seem to have noticed it because I'm slightly frightened of flying. So you're flying from one city to the other, and the plane is going pretty uniformly. But at some point there's some turbulence, and then the plane is generally waving around. And again it becomes smooth after some time. And I get heebie-jeebies during those situations where I get so frightened. And so that's something like this, So what the reason for that is that there is a column of warm air which has now come up from the earth below. And the density of the air has suddenly, the column of air has suddenly changed. And the way the plane was reacting to the atmosphere and the density of the air, now the plane is suddenly encountering, literally sometimes in meters, it's encountering something else which it had not encountered just a few minutes or so back. And it really cannot respond. Then finally, I think something happens, and I don't know what they do, but it kind of smoothens out. But many times the turbulence can't be smoothened out, because probably it is within the error which is acceptable. It's not acceptable to me because I'm sitting frightened in my seat over there. And this turbulence which comes in these pockets of air, how do you think it happens? It happens because there is this built environment below, right in the ground below. And people have thoughtlessly made some buildings, and those buildings are heating up, and that is creating this draft of air, column of air. And I'm sure these many people who are involved in the construction, these untrained civil engineers and others, they don't know about all this. And this is one of the ripple effects I was telling you about. This is just one tiny little example just to dramatize it. It's not just, maybe it is not so serious, but the same thing, it is called the heat island effect at a larger scale, at a scale of a town or a city. This can seriously change the temperature itself. Out in the fields, the temperature may be some X degrees, and in the city, the temperature has gone up almost by 3 and 4, 5, 6 degrees. That's pretty significant. And the reason is of that additional concrete which came up there, additional interventions which happened in that particular place, the greenery got spoiled. We have dug out the natural soil and the vegetation, right? And then you have gone and plonked that building there, whatever you may say. So obviously the first thing which needs to be seriously considered is that all really required? And do you really need to do this if you want to perform as an architect? That is something which is a little less understood, less respected. You cannot give null advice quite easily in front of client. They say, what kind of architect is this? I came to design my bungalow, and I say that don't design anything. So there's a whole lot of things which needs to be covered here. The same thing happens even in software architecture. People are, people who have just graduated from some small college, not really thought through things. They know a little bit of various types of coding, and they are saying, oh wow, I'll just gamify this and make them attracted to that particular notification. I'll show a red dot with a number there, and people will get excited of how many likes are there. What does it result in? Finally, there are turbulences there also, right? And there are turbulences and shakes which happens in people's lives because of that. So architecture desperately needs to be understood as a knowledge building field where the knowledge builder and the person who's actually responsible for creating that piece of architecture needs to be respected and given money even for null advice. Imagine that earlier scenario and that doctor says just go and sleep. There's nothing wrong with you. Will you say that I don't want to pay you because you didn't give me any medicines? Will you say that? Will anybody come out of that clinic and say, I don't want to pay this doctor anything. He has not given me anything to any medicines or anything. So why should I pay you? Will anybody say that? So this doesn't happen in the medical field, but it will happen in architecture. And architects spend time really getting into the brief of that problem. It's called the brief. The client says that I want to do these things. And an architect spends quality time trying to understand how and where and in what situation, what type of interventions is needed. And if that results in nothing to be built, pay that architect. Once that architect realizes that I can get paid for my brains rather than what I do with my hands, then one of the ways by which this particular field will improve and there will be much less problems for the world around. So thank you so much for listening till here. I hope to see you the next time also. Thank you very much.